Okay, weekly, text-based, Tanya. What chapter are we on? 34. Now, there was a question at the very end of last week, which I asked to be reminded of. And as I was running in late, I was reminded of the question. The question was, last week we spoke about how Hashem has such nachas, he has such unique satisfaction from the paradox of creating a world which is inherently, by design, inhospitable to his presence. He created a world which appears to be autonomously operating. If one looks at it from a materialistic point of view, one could be led to believe that it is ontologically independent, and it becomes very, the idea of a creator becomes a very abstract idea. You have to actually think about it philosophically. So that's what it means that God is hidden in the world. But he wanted it that way. He wanted a world where it's hard to find him, so to speak. And then in such a world that we should overcome the false evidence that would make us come to a conclusion that the world has no manager, operator, creator, and realize that really Hashem not only created the world, but he's here right now, and we let him in by through our thoughts, through aligning our consciousness with the truth, and Hashem has profound satisfaction from that. In other words, a world where the way I said it last week is the Groucho Marx line, I would never want to be a member of a club that would have somebody like me as a member. Hashem doesn't get nachas from being recognized in heaven by the angels. He gets nachas, that's the club that would have him as a member. He gets nachas from being recognized by souls in bodies who have all the different distractions and complications of life that would make them forget God, or even, God forbid, to deny God. And that's the club that, so to speak, wouldn't have him as a member. And then nevertheless, we say, Hashem, please come. Oh, you have the name? Okay, thank you. And Hashem has profound satisfaction from that. So the question that I was asked at the very end of last week, and I'm reminded to return to at the beginning of this chapter, is, well, if Hashem enjoys that so much, why will he ever allow Mashiach to come, in which case his presence will be undeniably, empirically evident to everyone. V'ro chol basar yachdav, like the prophet says, all flesh will see. It will no longer take faith to believe in God. It'll just be something that'll be materially and empirically evident. Our flesh itself, our five senses themselves will attest to the fact that there is a creator of the creation. But why would he ever let that happen? Because then he won't be able to have the thrill of that paradox. That was a question that was asked at the end of last week. So I'll answer the question with a story. One Erev Rosh Hashanah, the Ruzhiner Tzaddik, Rabbi Yisrael Ruzhiner, came into the Beis Medrash and he saw a group of Chassidim, and he said to them, there was once a simple Jew who managed an inn in the countryside. That's how he made a living. And because he lived in the middle of nowhere, he didn't daven in shul. He had no shul around him. Once a year, on Rosh Hashanah, he would go to the nearest town, which itself was a tiny little town, but for him, that was the big city, relatively. And they had a shul, they had a minyan. And he would go stay for Yom Tov in the town, and he would daven in shul. Now, being a simple Jew and not really used to davening in a shul and used to the prayers, he didn't really understand what was going on. So what he would do is he would just watch everybody else, and he would imitate, sort of like a little kid. So this simple Jew comes to the town for Rosh Hashanah, and he's davening Rosh Hashanah morning in shul, and everybody steps back 3 steps, and they step forward, and they start davening the silent prayer, Shemona Esrei, and they start crying. So he thinks to himself, why is everybody crying all at once? What's happening? And he says, oh, I know why they're crying. I just realized. Because it's late in the day already, and we haven't eaten. They're hungry. They're crying because they're hungry. That's it. So mystery solved. And he was very satisfied with that explanation until people one by one stopped. They finished their silent prayer, and they stepped 3 steps back out of the Shemona Esrei prayer, and they stopped crying one by one. So he says, well, why did everyone stop crying? We didn't eat yet. Like, I thought they were crying because they're hungry, so they should cry until they eat, but they stopped crying, but they didn't eat. What's going on? So he says, oh, I realize. When I walked into shul, I saw in the kitchen, they had a meat bone boiling on the stove. And you know how that meat bone is. It simmers and simmers, and it's one of those things you cook it for days, and it just gets more and more tender and more juicy and succulent. So he says, I realize why they stopped crying, because they remembered the meat bone that's simmering on the pot, and they all said, hold on, yeah, we're hungry, we want to eat, but if we wait, if davening takes a long time and we don't get to eat until later, that's actually better, because the longer we prolong our time of eating, then the more juicy the meat bone is going to be. So that's why they stopped crying, in the simple Jew's mind. That's why they stopped crying. But then came the preparations for the shofar. They started saying the Lam Natzeach 7 times, and everyone started crying again. They just bawling. Everyone lost it. But he doesn't know that's why they're crying. He doesn't know they're about to sound the shofar. So in his mind, he's like, well, why did they start crying again? I thought we all agreed, in his mind that we all agreed. I thought we all agreed that it was good that it was taking so long to eat, because the longer we wait, the more juicy the meat bone becomes. Why are they crying again? So he says, I know why. Because it's true. It's true that the meat bone is only getting juicier and juicier every minute that we push off eating. But practically speaking, at some point, it doesn't matter how much yummier the meat bone's getting, you got to eat already. And that's why they're crying, because we got to eat already. That was the story that the Ruzhner told his Chassidim Erev Rosh Hashanah, and he left the Beis Medrash, and one of the older Chassidim said to the rest of the Chassidim, the Rebbe just told us a mashal, a parable for the Galus, for the exile. I don't think he even had to explain. I think everyone understood, but I'll just spell it out. Of course, we cry out and we say, Hashem, bring us Mashiach already. We're languishing in this exile, and that's when we start crying. But then we stop and we say, hold on a second. If you learn a little Chassidus and you understand what happens in exile, this is incredible. This opportunity to overcome this darkness, and it's just getting better and better and better. The longer we stay in exile, and it's more geschmack for us, is more geschmack for Hashem. But then you come to a point, you say, you know what? Yeah, that's good in theory. But practically speaking, come on, at some point you have to eat. It doesn't matter how much yummier the meat bone's getting, you have to eat already. And so we need Mashiach already now, instead of waiting theoretically to have it get more, to have more and more pleasure, more and more enjoyment from it. So that's the answer to the question, which is, in theory, is this something that could go on longer and longer and longer, and everyone's enjoying it, and it's such a thrill? Yeah, in theory, but in reality, enough already. There comes a point where you can't keep staring at your dessert, getting excited about it. You got to eat it already. I also want to mention that today, what is it today? Ches Shvat, the 8th day of the Hebrew month of Shvat, is the yahrzeit of a dear friend, Chaim Shner Zalman Yehuda ben Yibodel L'Chaim Aruchim Aaron Leib, my friend Yudi Dukes. Today's the second yahrzeit. His neshama should have an aliyah, but more importantly than the neshama having an aliyah is enough already. We need Mashiach and Tchias HaMesim. His neshama should come back He should be reunited with his family and with all of us. Okay, so Perek Lamed Daled, chapter 34. We ready? Ready or not? It is known that the Aves, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were called the chariot. They were known as the chariot. What are we talking about now? We're continuing the theme of chapter 33, which was joy. I mean, we started the theme of joy in chapter 26. In chapter 33, we spoke about a specific source for joy. That we're going to be happy about what?
Our connection to Hashem.
We're going to be happy about giving joy to Hashem. What specific joy are we giving him?
That we recognize his unity.
We recognize his unity. Okay, why does that give him joy?
Because we transform darkness into light.
We transform darkness into light. Which darkness?
The darkness of the Kripa. That they're separate entities. That they cease to be separate entities.
Right, that the default setting of this world is things seem to be separate. And we overcome that. We recognize God's unity, and that gives him joy. Okay. So we're speaking about, and metaphorically we call that hosting Hashem, being his host, being the one who gives him the guest pass to get into the club. So in the previous chapter, we're speaking about the joy that we have in giving Hashem joy by getting him in, so to speak, to this world. The world that he created to be so inhospitable to his presence. We're continuing this theme, and we're talking about letting Hashem into this world as a source of joy. It should bring us joy. We're letting Hashem into this world. Okay. So we start off, we say that the Aves, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yankiv, they were known as the Merkava, as the chariot. Why were they called the chariot? Shekol Yameim La'ilam, Le'hifsiku afilu shoachas, Melakasha daitim v'nishmasim liturgy boin hoilamim, that their entire days, all their lives, they did not cease for 1 second from God consciousness, from connecting their focus and their souls to the Master of the worlds. With a state of absolute surrender that we mentioned before to his oneness. In other words, they're called the Merkava, they're called the chariot because just like a chariot has no will of its own, it only does what the rider wants it to do it. The rider steers the chariot. The chariot is not autonomous. So too, they were absolutely fully surrendered vehicles to the will of God. All of their lives, constantly, without cessation. Then after them, all of the prophets, relatively speaking, each one on their level. We're not saying there's one level. There were different levels. But relatively speaking, all the prophets had a similar type of thing going on. They were also surrendered all of their days to the divine will. Now the highest level attained was that of Moshe Rabbeinu. He was the most surrendered. All of it says about Moshe. The Shekhinah spoke from Moshe's throat. In other words, ventriloquism. Is that accurate? Ventriloquism, you know? Yeah. Like Charlie McCarthy. So when Hashem wanted to speak, he would speak through Moshe. You think Moshe is speaking? Moshe is channeling. Moshe is a conduit. Hashem is speaking through Moshe. So that's how surrendered Moshe was. Not that Moshe was inspired. Moshe was sensitive enough to figure out what kinds of things Hashem would want to say. That's a chacham, by the way. A chacham is somebody who can figure out, based on what Hashem has already told us, what kinds of things Hashem would want us to know. But here we're talking about a navi, a channel. He's not even saying his own words. He's just a megaphone for Hashem. Now, every single one of us had this level momentarily at the revelation at Sinai. Qualitatively, there's not much of a difference between the surrender that Moshe Rabbeinu and the Avos had to Hashem and the surrender that all of us had at the time of Har Sinai. Quantitatively, yeah, there's a big difference. Quantitatively, they had it all the time. Quantitatively, the rest of us only had it during that very particular event. But qualitatively, it's pretty comparable. Rak shelo yochlu lispel, but they couldn't tolerate it for long. K'maimer azalek our sages say al kol dibur paruch nishmas chulu. That with each speech, when Hashem would say the Ten Commandments, they didn't get very far because they heard the first two and their souls popped out of their bodies each time. Shu inyan bittul b'mitzias hanizkel el. That's that idea of being totally nullified. Lochin, therefore, miyad amar lahem la'ases le'mishkan uvei kodshei kodshim. So therefore, now we're going to tell a little story. After Matan Torah, Hashem said, right after Matan Torah, make a Mishkan, a sanctuary, and within the sanctuary there should be a Holy of Holies, an inner chamber, an inner sanctum. La'ashros Shchinasei, where the Shechina, where Hashem's presence can dwell. Shuhu gilu yichudei yisborach kamei sheyisborach lakaman. And like we're going to explain later on, probably like chapters 51, 52, 53, in the Holy of Holies, in the sanctuary and in the temple, there was a revelation of God's oneness. In other words, we couldn't tolerate having such intense revelation on an individual basis for long. So therefore, Hashem created a place where that level of revelation would take place, and we could go about our regular lives, undisturbed, so to speak. Okay? But then something else happened. The temple was destroyed. Okay, you following the narrative? So it started off that at the time of Matan Torah, we all had, at least for the first two commandments, we all had this incredible revelation of God's oneness, akin to the level that Moshe Rabbeinu and the Avos would have. But we couldn't tolerate it. So then after that, Hashem said, okay, fine, I'll put it in a very contained situation. I'll put it in the Holy of Holies. And that's where it was. But then what happened? The temple was destroyed. Meshachar Beis HaMikdash. Now what? Now where's this oneness revealed in the world? Hashem does not have a sanctuary, a place to dwell. Hu Yehuda Yisborich, a place for his oneness to be revealed. Ella, except Arba Ame Shel Halacha, the 4 cubits of halacha. The 4 cubits of halacha. It's an expression. The Dalet Ames means the immediate environs, meaning a place where halacha, Hashem's will, as expressed in halacha, is studied. So that's where he's revealed. In other words, halacha is Hashem's will and his wisdom invested in the halachas as they are set before us. So, let's recap here. The Avos and Moshe Rabbeinu had this revelation of God's oneness all the time, and they were able to tolerate it somehow. They were just built different. The rest of us experienced it very, very temporarily at the moment when God was revealed at Sinai. We couldn't really tolerate it. Our souls popped out of our bodies. It wasn't sustainable. So Hashem said, fine, I'm going to contain that revelation in the Holy of Holies in the sanctuary, and then later in the permanent temple. But then that was destroyed, so we don't have that in the world. So now where does Hashem have in his world? The Dalet Ames Shel Halacha. Halacha means Jewish law, but it's more than law. It means the will and the wisdom of the Creator as condensed through the codification in halacha. So wherever his law is studied, you sit down. What? Studied. Wherever his law is studied, wherever anybody cares to find out what is Hashem's desire, what is his preference, what is his perspective. Halacha. Halacha. Halacha.
It's
It is specifically halacha.
not other things.
It's not other things. Not even chassidus.
Right.
So chassidus you learn in order to appreciate
To get
the
ready
value
for
of
that.
studying halacha.
Yeah.
Yeah, but specifically studying halacha. Yeah.
Is the study of halacha a keyhole into Hashem's chokhmah?
A keyhole into Hashem's chokhmah. Yeah, I guess you could call it that. He says, "Ritzonei v'chokhmasei," Hashem's will and Hashem's wisdom. So I wouldn't even call it a keyhole. It's like it is an embodiment of His will and wisdom. We spoke about it in chapter 5. If you remember chapter 5, everyone remembers chapter 5. Yeah.
So Rebbe, sorry, can you just expand on that? So chokhmah.
Let's keep it real simple English.
Okay.
I said before, Hashem has preferences. He likes certain things. He doesn't like other things. Like somebody walks into the room and says, I want the couch over there. Okay? So that's a very personal expression of their preferences. So when Hashem walks into a room and says, that door needs a mezuzah. That one doesn't. That's an expression of Hashem. So you want to get to know Hashem, go find out His preferences.
But are we trying to tap into Hashem's chokhmah? Is our chokhmah, when we're studying halacha,
You're trying to get to know Hashem.
Okay.
You're going out, you're having dinner, you're saying, tell me what you like. What's your favorite color?
But then I have a question.
I'm not joking. It's yeah.
Yeshivot all around the world.
Why don't the yeshivas learn halacha? I don't know.
Mom,
I don't. They learn Gemara. They don't. I don't know. We have to tell them about what it says here in this chapter of Tanya.
does Chabad learn halacha more?
Yeah. Does Chabad learn halacha more in yeshiva? I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Study of
Yeah.
Torah.
Like I always feel like the boys are lacking halacha. They
Yeah.
can give you Gemara from here to tomorrow, but
Yeah.
something about Shabbat, they're clueless.
Yeah. Yeah. We learn halacha in yeshiva. Yeah. Yeah. Huh?
In the brachas in the morning, the study of Torah is Keneged Kulam to all these mitzvahs.
Yeah.
So there must be some credit for just studying Torah in general.
Yeah. But we're talking about halacha right now. Has a unique advantage. Halacha has a unique.
Is Torah. I mean,
Halacha is an area of Torah study,
Yeah.
but it has a unique advantage. Because halacha is bottom line, Hashem's preference. This is what He likes.
Right.
This is how He wants it done. Yeah?
I understand how Har Sinai and being in learning halacha, you experience that revelation, but when it wasn't the Kodesh Kodashim, only the Kohen Gadol could experience that. So how did we experience it?
You're asking in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, but only the Kohen Gadol got to see it. Okay, so, right. So, it's a good question. How does everyone have access to it? And you know, to a certain extent, it made the entire world a more refined place. I mean, the Gemara says even the non-Jewish nations, if they would have known the benefit that the temple gave to the world, they wouldn't have sent their armies to destroy it. They would have sent all of their armies to protect it. In other words, even if not everybody can directly experience the revelation of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the fact that there's such a place in the physical world makes the world a better place.
There was diffusion.
Diffusion, yeah, that's right. Okay, well, let's continue here. All right. V'lochein, therefore, after a person thinks deeply about this idea of surrender, of oneness, if he thinks about it to his capacity, this is what he should feel. All right, now, here's a little like self-talk. I don't want to call it a meditation, but it's like a little self-talk that you're supposed to say to yourself. You're speaking to yourself here in the first person. Kimiyes katan sichli. So you see, speaking of sichli, my seichel is speaking in the first person. This is what you're saying to yourself. Kimiyes katan sichli, because my seichel, my mind is insufficient. V'sherish nishmasi mehachil, and the level of my soul, root, is insufficient to sustain, to have the wherewithal. Lies merkava mishkan liyichudis baruch be'emes lamite, to be a true vehicle or dwelling place for Hashem's oneness. Ma'achad les machshava dili Tfisa maseges by yisbarich klal uklal shum asag ba'elam, because my thoughts cannot grasp Hashem at all whatsoever. V'lei shemetz menhu masagas ha'avis v'anivim. I can't grasp anything even comparable to what the patriarchs and the prophets were able to do. Elazais, accordingly, I'm going to make for Hashem a mishkan, a dwelling place, where in my Torah study, according to my free time. Set times, appointed times, scheduled times, day and night, as prescribed by the laws of Torah study. There are laws in Torah about how much Torah each person has to study. Like the sages say, the minimum amount is even to study one halacha in the morning and one at night. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a little mishkan for Hashem in my life. It's called the times that I carve out, my kviyas itim, my scheduled times for learning Torah. And that's the little dwelling place in this world that I'm giving to Hashem. And that's really all that I can handle. Meaning to say, I'm not able to experience that level of bittul, of surrender, that Moshe Rabbeinu and the Aves were able to maintain. I can't have that level of bittul that we all had at Har Sinai. In fact, we weren't able to handle it back then either. And it would be nice if there was a Kodesh HaKadoshim right now, but there isn't. So therefore, I'm going to carve out a space for Hashem in my life by having appointed times for learning His will and wisdom. This is the whole point. Remember, chapter 34 is continuing the theme we started in chapter 26. And the theme we started in chapter 26 is what? In one word?
Joy.
Joy. Thank you. So this should make your heart glad. And you should give thanks. You should be grateful to Hashem for your lot. You get to be Hashem's host at least twice a day, because you have a morning class and an evening class. According to your free time. According to your capacity, whatever Hashem will give you. Different people have different levels of commitments. If Hashem will give you more free time, he of pure hands will do more. And he'll have good intention. Now, here's a chiddush. I'm going to carve out the time according to my capacity, as is delineated clearly in Hilchos Talmud Torah, where it tells me how much time I am obligated to make for Torah study. Here the Alter Rebbe says a chiddush. He says something novel. When you carve out that time, obviously you're not learning halacha all day. Even people who learn halacha all day, so to speak, eat and sleep and drink. And how much more so, most people who learn halacha, they're not learning it all day. They're not only stopping to eat, sleep, and drink, they're stopping to work, stopping to fix a couple things around the house, stopping to drive carpool, maybe go get groceries. There's a lot of things you're stopping for. So he says, V'gam shor hayim kulei. But the rest of the entire day, she'esik b'masu matan, where you're dealing with business, will also be a dwelling place for Hashem. When you give tzedakah from the toil of your work. Giving tzedakah is one of Hashem's midos. Mahu rachum v'chulu, just as He is compassionate, so shall you be compassionate. Be godlike, emulate God. Like it says in the Zohar, Chesed Re'eh Yamina, kindness is Hashem's right hand, so to speak, and we emulate Hashem by giving tzedakah. Va'av she'einu neisen ela chaimish. And although he only gives a fifth of his earnings, meaning the maximum to give is a fifth. Tzedakah is supposed to be meiser, a tenth, or if you want to be extra generous, you can give chaimish, you can give a fifth. You're not supposed to give more than a fifth because then you'll become indigent and you'll be dependent on others, so that's not responsible. Although when you get us Hatshuva, the Alter Rebbe explains heterim to give more than a fifth, but we're not going to get into that right now. So he says, and although he's only giving a fifth, remember we're saying that basically now, not only am I making a mishkan for Hashem when I'm learning halacha, but I'm making a mishkan for Hashem when I'm working. Because at the end, I take the money that I earned from working and I give tzedakah. But hold on a second. I'm only going to give a maximum, I'm going to give 20% of what I earned. So 20% of the time that I'm working should be a mishkan for Hashem. He says, no, 100% of it is. How does that work out? How do you work out that math? So he says, even though you only do a fifth. The fifth raises up with it the other 4/5 to become a dwelling place for Hashem. How so? Like it's known, the saying of our sages, Shemitzvah tzedakah, shkula keneg kol karbones. Tzedakah is considered tantamount to all of the sacrificial offerings in the temple. Okay, great. All right, where are you going with this? Ube karbones, regarding the karbones, the sacrificial offerings in the temple, with one animal, all of the animal kingdom would be elevated. It would be a representative, a delegate, to elevate the entire animal kingdom. And all of the vegetative kingdom. Through the flour of the mincha offering that was mixed with olive oil. So we have this notion in the karbones of a certain portion being the actual sacrifice, but it bringing with it, it being representative of its entire kingdom and bringing that with it. So if tzedakah is like karbones, then if I give a portion of my money as tzedakah, then the rest of the money that I don't give is also elevated. And besides for that, when you do learn Torah and you do daven, you're elevating to Hashem everything you ate and drank and everything you benefited from the other 4/5 that you didn't give away to tzedakah, that you kept for yourself, but you're using it to maintain your health of your body. And now when you're using your body to daven and to learn, you're burning those calories, davening and learning. We spoke about this in chapter 7. You're elevating the fuel that you're burning while you're doing those holy activities. And what's that fuel? The fuel is the resources that you bought with the money that you earned by working. So then, by association, you're elevating the entire enterprise of working. Like we're also going to explain much more at length in coming chapters. So basically, the Alter Rebbe is explaining how your entire life can be a mishkan for Hashem. Your entire life can be devoted to making a place for Hashem in this world.
So it's not just the learning halacha.
Well, we started with the learning. Yeah, we said that's the most overt mishkan for Hashem. Ein la kodesh baruch hu be'elam ela daled amishal halacha. That's pretty overt. That Hashem has, wherever halacha is studied, where His wisdom and His will is studied, there He is in His world. But then Alter Rebbe went further and said, also we could expand that to our mundane affairs as well. Yeah.
Because the thought is equivalent to learning the halacha. The garments, the other garments, the speech and the action have to be done too in order for us to elevate everything. It's not enough just to learn and think. One has to translate that into action, right?
Well, we'll talk about that more later, about the necessity of action as far as bringing Hashem into the world. Yeah, we'll speak about that more like in...
When we give tzedakah,
right.
That's the action.
Yeah. We'll
So we're translating the halacha.
Yeah, we'll speak about that overtly in chapter 37.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah.
we become the sanctuary.
We become the sanctuary. Our lives become the sanctuary. Our lives become a sanctuary. Now, get ready, because he's going to wrap up the whole group of chapters that we started back in chapter 26. Now, remember, what was the theme? Remember back in chapter 26? The wrestlers, joy. Remember the wrestlers? One wrestler, he's really better than the other wrestler, but he lost to an inferior opponent because he was feeling bad. He lost the emotional edge. He got defeated because he was feeling blah. And we said, you got to be joyous in order to serve Hashem properly. So remember, we started this whole journey back in chapter 26. We spoke about first half of chapter 26, how to overcome sources of sadness that would come from problems that we have in our material lives. And the second half of chapter 26, we spoke about how to overcome sadness we might have because of moral failings. And in chapter 27, we spoke about overcoming sadness that would come because of shame that we have, because of unwholesome desires. Chapter 28, we spoke about how to overcome the sadness that we would have because we feel bad that our davening isn't effective, because we get distracted by stray thoughts. Chapter 29, we spoke about not sadness, but apathy, which is even more dangerous. Remember smashing that log so it can catch fire. And then in chapter 30, we spoke about humility, which is also about opening ourselves up to that inspiration, smashing the log again. In 31, we spoke more about that, about humility, and especially about identifying with the soul and being frustrated with the body, but taking joy in the soul. Remember, returning the little princess to her father's house, to the castle, every time you do a mitzvah. Chapter 32, we took a little bit of a break, a little detour. We talked about loving your fellow, just like I'm identifying chiefly as a soul that happens to have a body, so too I identify you chiefly as a soul that happens to have a body. Chapter 33, we had another source for joy, thinking about how we are Hashem's hosts in this world. Chapter 34, a similar idea, how we are Hashem's hosts in this world. Chapter 33 was we're hosting Hashem every time we believe that God is one and God is here. Chapter 34 was more about giving Hashem a place in this world through living a Jewish life, through learning halacha and through giving tzedakah. Okay, so we have a lot of ways to make ourselves happy and to troubleshoot sources of sadness and apathy. Now, he wraps it up. V'hinei. B'chol prate minei simchais hanefesh nizkarim la'el. All the specific types of joy that have been mentioned above. He means going all the way back to chapter 26. Ein mehen meniya liyes nivza be'einov nimos. They are not mutually exclusive with being despicable in one's eyes. V'leiv nishbar, and having a broken heart. V'ruach nemucha, and a lowly spirit. B'shasa simcha mamash, at the very same moment of joy. It's not a contradiction. You can have all the forms of joy we spoke about and still have this contrite feeling of utter frustration and despair. It's not a contradiction. How is it not a contradiction? The frustration that he has, where he's appalled with himself, it's not his real self. It's his body and his animal soul. So yeah, I do have a certain negative feeling about my body and my animal soul because they're acting as obstructions. Whereas my joy, it's about my godly soul. And the godly spark in my godly soul which enlivens it. Like mentioned above in chapter 31. Identifying more with the joy of the soul. And this sentiment was similarly expressed in the Zayar, where it says, Bechia, sadness, crying, weeping. Tekiah is affixed, established, B'liboy, in my heart, Misitra da, on this side. V'chedva, and joy, Tekiah, is established, B'liboy, in my heart, Misitra da, on the other side. In other words, we can maintain simultaneously two opposite emotional states. We can have weeping over the frustration we feel, over the body and the animal soul acting as obstructions to our spiritual path. And simultaneously, it's not a contradiction at all. It actually goes hand in hand. They even complement each other. We can have joy over the triumph of the godly soul in its ability to overcome that and to achieve a connection with Hashem and even to give Hashem joy.
Is that the right side or the left side?
Which is the left, right or the left? I don't know. It doesn't say. I would have to,
Do they vacillate?
I don't know. Maybe it's front and back. Maybe it's top and bottom. I don't know which sides.
Isn't the left soul the seat of the,
Yeah, I know. I learned early, but I don't want to assume anything. Yeah,
right
you're right. In chapter 9, I did learn that the left and the right, the left is Nefesh Bahamis, the right is the, but I don't know which one is where. Maybe it's counterintuitive. Maybe the right side is sad because that's where the Nefesh Elokis is, and the left side is happy because that's where, I don't know. Who knows? Things are always confusing, so I don't want to assume. He just said this side or that side. I don't know which side. Yeah?
But that doesn't include apathy,
What?
right? That you can hold two emotions, but not if you have apathy, like Timtum Halek. Then you're just.
Right, apathy is no good. Apathy is useless. We don't want the apathy.
You could be brokenhearted and then.
Broken-hearted. Right, apathy is not broken-hearted. Actually, apathy is a defense mechanism against feeling brokenhearted. I don't want to feel anguish, so I go numb. So the apathy is yuck. 29, 30, 31, we spoke about. Get rid of that. It serves no purpose. But we are going to preserve one negative emotion, the brokenheartedness. And even though we don't like feeling negative feelings, but he says it's okay. It has its place. What?
That's why you were saying earlier, at appointed times, you could feel sad for a purpose.
Well, appointed times was chapter 26 when he says about rehashing your misdeeds. Right now, we're not talking about revisiting our misdeeds because that is only at appointed times. This is not just appointed times. This is a regular way of functioning, but this is not thinking about bad things that you've done. That, he says, set an appointment. Here is more through your day. It's totally sustainable and acceptable and even preferable to maintain two simultaneous emotions.
how?
How? Because it's not a contradiction.
No, but we started off with the 4 cubits of halacha.
Yeah,
So now we've come to this.
Yeah.
This is the summary.
yeah.
My question is, how do we get to this point?
How do we get to it?
Why did we start with the 4 cubits of halacha to get to this point?
This point is a rehash of all the chapters starting from 26. So we just learned one more cause for joy, which is when you give Hashem a place in this world through learning halakha and giving tzedakah.
But isn't that the whole point of everything?
Isn't that all unbridled joy?
But here's the thing, and this is the chiddush, that even unbridled joy can be experienced simultaneous with frustration and brokenheartedness.
That's not my question.
What are you asking?
My question is that the 4 cubits of halacha.
Yeah,
Making a place for Hashem.
making a place for Hashem, right? Yeah,
Right? So that's the ultimate goal of why we are here.
yeah,
And he ends off by saying, how do we make that place?
yeah.
By being filled with joy, which is what we started
No,
off with in
no,
the
no,
beginning.
no. We don't make that place by being filled with joy. We're filled with joy because we're making that place.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to know.
Right. This is supposed to make you happy. And then at the end he says, and by the way, I just give you one more thing to be happy about. And I want you to know that with all these things I give you to be happy about, it doesn't preclude legitimate reasons for being frustrated at the exact same time. Got it?